Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week we will review a fresh poll on the 2023 race for the governor's office. Is Tate Reeves sitting pretty, or will Brandon Presley build momentum? Magnolia Tribune's Russ Latino joins us to discuss their polling with Mason Dixon. Also, 12 News' political reporter Richard Lake talks one-on-one with the sole black lawmaker in the conference on House Bill 1020, Earle Banks, on a bill with big implications for law and order in Jackson. This Sunday on Mississippi Insight. Let's go right to the polling with Russ Latino. He is the founder and CEO of MagnoliaTribune.com, a nonprofit site for news, analysis, and more. Russ, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Byron.
Russ, talk about the poll and who you worked with on it.
Yeah, so we commissioned the poll with Mason Dixon Polling. They've been polling in Mississippi since 1987, so a long track record of asking Mississippians tough questions. They have an A rating with a 538 pollster ranking, which is sort of the clearinghouse, if you will, of what good pollsters look like, with 446 analyzed polls with great accuracy. So we felt confident bringing them in and really trying to assess not only what the head-to-head matchup looks like between Republican incumbent Tate Reeves and his Democrat challenger Brandon Presley, but to really understand the issues that are motivating voters to either stick with Governor Reeves or to take a chance on the challenger.
You found that Republican Governor Tate Reeves has a 7-point edge in the race at this early point against the Public Service Commissioner, Democrat Brandon Presley, but that finding includes some undecided respondents, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the governor starts this race with a 7-point lead. You'll remember that he beat Jim Hood in 2019 by about a 5-point lead. He also starts with an incredible sort of fundraising advantage, basically 10-1 over Commissioner Presley in terms of resources available out of the gate to do the campaign. But to your point, it's very early. And so because of the earliness of it, there's about 15% in that poll that said that they were undecided at this point in time. And certainly the biggest issue for Commissioner Presley is that his name ID is still very, very low. So something like 37% of the people who responded said that they didn't recognize his name. Another 39% hadn't developed an opinion on him yet, even though they might have known his name. And so he's got a lot of work to do to introduce himself. And it's very, very early in terms of looking at these polling. But if you're Governor Reeves, you know that you start with some advantage over a relatively unknown challenger.
And where is Reeves winning geographically?
Yeah, so pretty much everywhere with the exception of the Mississippi Delta. He's strongest on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and North Mississippi. Both of those regions, he has a 15-point advantage over Commissioner Presley. In the Pine Belt, it's a 10-point advantage. In East Mississippi, it's about a 9-point advantage. And then in Central Mississippi, including much of your listening audience, it's only a 2-point advantage. So it's close in Central Mississippi. But Commissioner Presley is winning one region, and that one region is the Mississippi Delta, and he's winning that by about 15 points.
You just talked about Presley's name recognition and fundraising efforts where he's kind of behind. It's an uphill climb, but does he have time to make up that difference, you think?
I mean, certainly, anything can happen in an election season. I think if you're handicapping this race, you would assume that Governor Reeves will emerge victorious, even if it's a tight race in the end. But, there are lots of wild cards at play every election season. And so it's going to be really interesting to follow it as we get closer. One of the things is we've had this sort of litany of polls early on, and that gives you a sense of where things are at the start. But people really start paying attention to these races a month out, 2 weeks out. And so we'll know a lot more as we get closer and continue polling about what the race is going to look like.
You also did some polling on issues with Mason Dixon, and you found a lot of divergence on party leanings on what people consider are most important issues. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if you just looked at what Republicans, Democrats, and Independents collectively identified, you'd see that jobs in the economy was number one, crime was number two, and then education and protecting family values was rated as the third most important issue. But if you broke that down and look at how identified Republicans and Democrats identified most important and least important issues, there was incredible divergence. So Republican voters overwhelmingly said that protecting family values was the number one issue in the state of Mississippi. Jobs in the economy was second, and then crime was third. And then if you compare that On the Democrat side, the least important issue identified was protecting family values. So on one side, you've got it being the most important issue. On the other side, the very least important issue, which shows a pretty strong divergence. There's another example of that goes the other direction. For Democrats, access to health care was the number one issue. 24% of Democrats who responded said that's their number one issue and how they're going to vote for governor. Amongst Republicans, only 3% of respondents said it was their number one issue. So you can see heading into this thing, there's very different mindsets about what is important when it comes to picking a candidate that you're going to vote for.
So I guess when you get to a general election, I wonder how you spin that or where you go from there.
Yeah, I think if you're a Republican candidate, you're going to want to talk about the fact that you are protecting traditional family values, that you care about the nuclear family, that policies that you're trying to implement are ultimately designed to make sure that kids have a safe environment in schools, to some degree protecting against what people view as radical ideologies. And I think if you're a Democrat, what you're going to hear an awful lot of, or what the message is going to be to your constituent, is really going to be, can we expand Medicaid or not? And so, both sides will have their own message that appeals to their own base. And then the question just becomes an enthusiasm question or a numerical question as to who turns out the most voters.
And how can people find your complete poll?
Yeah, so if you go to magnoliatribune.com, there have been a couple different articles, and you can access it there.
Now let's get your thoughts on some legislative affairs that we have, and we're getting down to just a few days left on the calendar for the 2023 session. And broadly speaking, has this session surprised you in any way?
In some ways, yes. I mean, I think an election year session is always sleepy. It tends to not have a lot of big controversial issues come up, and that's largely been true. I think in a lot of ways there was an expectation that you might see some real tax reform done again this year, given how big the surpluses are right now. I think there probably have been some surprises on things that weren't expected. I don't think anybody coming into this session expected an MAEP rewrite to be on the table. So that's something that with just a few weeks left in the session got brought up, and I don't think that's something that anybody had really been talking about. And then I think there were a lot of questions about what was going to be done in the healthcare space, to help hospitals, whether or not there was going to be postpartum extension of Medicaid. And some of those things are playing out as we speak. The biggest thing right now as we head into conference weekend, which is kind of the last weekend of the session, is what is the budget going to look like? And so I think right now there's a lot of intense negotiation between the House and the Senate. The House appears to want a smaller budget. The Senate wants to spend a little bit more money, or maybe a lot more money, as it were. And so those are the things that coming down the home stretch are getting ironed out.
Yeah, public education funding has become that flashpoint. What are the prospects for full funding of MAEP, given the governor's apparent opposition to what the Senate did?
Yeah, and I don't know that I've necessarily heard the governor take a what I would call a firm position, one direction or the other. He certainly has expressed some caution, right, on doing this rapidly. I think there is a thought process amongst a lot of conservative leaders that we need to fund education well, but what does that mean? Is there something special about MAEP and that formula that we have to adhere to it or stick to it as sort of the golden rule of what education funding looks like? And so I think for a lot of folks, they're interested in revising the education funding formula. They're interested in making sure that it's more student-centered. But I think that this came up in a way that was pretty rapid without a lot of discussion. And for them, it might feel a little bit like they're doubling down on a system that they want to just overhaul altogether. My sense is that there won't be movement on that, right? That if you look at where current education funding is, it's gone up dramatically over the last several years, including a $250 million teacher pay raise last year. You had ARPA money, which was the federal money that poured in during COVID, and that was $1.5 billion that went directly to school districts. And so, I think there are a lot of legislators that we've spoke to who have said, we'd really like to understand how that $1.5 billion got spent before we appropriate another $181 million.
Another thing not happening this session is a new ballot initiative process. The Senate declined to take up the House's bill. What do you see about that?
Yeah, I think it's a mess. I think that when the court overturned the medical marijuana initiative results, it did so with a finding that there absolutely is a right in the Constitution for the people to amend the Constitution, but basically that the mechanism was broken, right? That the way signatures were gathered was broken. And so, I think there are a lot of people who have the mindset that there's a constitutional right and the legislature has an obligation to fix the mechanism, right? To restore that right to the people that's still in the Mississippi Constitution. And for 2 years, they've just been unable to do that. They've been unable to come to terms. The biggest issue has been that, the Senate bill on this, or the Senate proposal on this, has required an incredible number of signatures. So more than double the signatures that were required under the old law, the way that it operated. And I think there's a thought amongst a lot of people who are like, yeah, you could restore the ballot initiative process, but if you make it so hard that nobody can ever gather the signatures, you haven't really restored it. And that seems to be sort of the flashpoint, if you will, between the House and the Senate. The House's plan has been more lenient. And of course, the Senate killed that plan this year. I think it could become an election question, though, Byron, because I think people are serious about having the ability to have their voice heard. And they feel like maybe they're being denied that right now.
We're about to hear from Representative Earle Banks of Jackson. He's the sole black lawmaker involved in conference talks on House Bill 1020. What are your observations on the long process as it continues to drag out?
A lot of different ideas, an awful lot of emotion and questions of motivations tied up in that debate. I hope the legislature can come up with a good solution that listens to the people of Jackson, but that also recognizes ultimately that the well-being of the people who live in Jackson should be the #1 objective, right? And so if you've got an environment with the highest murder rate in the country, you've got an environment with all these questions about whether or not we've got safe drinking water, whether or not roads are in a condition that people can get to and from work, and travel safely. You've got this garbage question popping up now with the dispute with Richard's Disposal between the mayor and the city council. And I think all of these things ultimately put citizens in a really bad place. And so the challenge is, how do you come up with a set of solutions or a state sort of intervention to help without taking away people's autonomy, without being in a position where you're not listening to them? And I think the legislature has tried to figure that out. At times it's looked a little ham-fisted, but the intention is good, which is how do we help people who are in need of help?
Russ Latino, always good talking to you on this Mississippi Insight this morning, and a good conversation about what's happening in the state and also with the polling. Going to be a very interesting year when it comes to the election cycle, I think.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Russ. We'll be right back. We are a week away from sine die in the 2023 legislative session, and one of the remaining tasks is conference negotiations on House Bill 1020. That bill could pave the way for big changes in law enforcement in the capital city of Jackson. House and Senate negotiators have big differences in their approaches, and one of those conferees is Representative Earle Banks. The Democrat from Hinds County spoke with 12 News' Richard Lake a short time after he was notified of his appointment to conference.
I just love to ask you about your strategy. What is your main goal in working with your colleagues in the House, also in the Senate, surrounding House Bill 1020 and the conference process?
Well, of course, the conference process entails 2 House members and at least 2 senators sign off on a bill, the conference report, and submit it to the House and Senate. Of course, it does not have to be unanimous. So if I don't agree to it and don't sign it, it will still move forward without my signature. But I'm there at the table, and we're going to do everything we can to make a bill that's going to be helpful to the city of Jackson, to work to protect the citizens, to protect the businesses, and turn this crime around that we see on the streets of Jackson. That is my main concern, is reducing the crime and make people feel safe again, or safer again within the city. We have a situation also dealing with judges, and of course, we have expressed in meetings that we want judges that are experienced. If we're going to have judges appointed, they want experienced judges, not some lawyer coming in from somewhere who has no experience as being a judge. If we're going to have judges coming in, they need to be experienced judges that know how to do a trial. So if there is a conviction, that conviction will stand up and can go on, and that person can be taken off the streets of Jackson, because people feel that these people that commit crimes, they want them out the neighborhoods, out the streets, off the city of Jackson. So that's how the constituents feel. The constituents that I talk with want to feel safer within the city. Capitol Police has been in Jackson for decades and decades and decades. And of that experience of the Capitol Police being here, that has now been expanded now to other parts of the city. But 1020 was originally set for that it would just be expanded in the northeast Jackson. There are other areas of Jackson that need extra protection. The Jackson Zoo, more protection around Jackson State University, the municipal golf course, Hawkins Field. There are many places that we have tourists to come into the city, and they need to know that they are going to be safe within our city. So these are the things that we want to look for. Neighborhoods, like I say, tourist spots. We'll make sure people are safe within the city again, and that these thugs that we have running around the streets of Jackson know that there's additional forces that wants to take them down from the criminal activity that they commit.
Those additional forces. It seems that some residents of Jackson feel that Capitol Police might be a solution to that. How do you feel about their integration with Jackson Police as far as jurisdiction goes? How do you feel for those conversations?
Well, I feel that it should be, if we're going to have a Capital City Police expansion, they need to have concurrent jurisdiction with the city of Jackson, just as the Sheriff's Department does. We did a bill years ago to give the Hinds County Sheriff concurrent jurisdiction with the City of Jackson Police Department. And we do the same with Capitol Police, not taking anything away from Jackson Police Department. We have fine officers with the Jackson Police Department, but they need help. They're underfunded, they're undermanned, and we need to give them additional help. And this is one way I think that may work to help them. But we will have to negotiate this process and see what we come out with.
Right. Sir, you are the only black conferee on a bill that would control a majority black Democratic-led city. What does it mean to you that you're the lone representation of the city of Jackson and throughout this whole process?
Well, it is a responsibility I feel that I take, and that as the speaker felt that he needed to have, I assume just one black conferee at least on that. The Senate doesn't have any. That I have to talk to my Senate colleagues and other representatives and senators in Hinds County about where we are in this process of negotiating a conference report. And I'll talk to my law enforcement, my sheriff, and so forth, and let them know where we are, and make sure that we come up with something to protect the citizens, because that's what it's about. This is about protecting the citizens of Jackson, protecting the businesses of Jackson, and getting the criminal element off the streets of Jackson. That is what this is about. 1020 came out as an ugly piece of legislation, 1,080 pages, and now it's down to 10 pages, and it's like a caterpillar going into a butterfly. And we want that transition to go where we have a butterfly that can help save lives. We're tired of seeing where mothers are crying because some random gunshots are fired into houses and homes, and that child who's in the bed sleeping is hit by a bullet and maybe even killed. And these parents are there at the University Hospital begging and pleading with the doctors to please save my child's life. Please save my child. We're tired of that anguish and pain that the citizens of Jackson have to put up with this criminal element. So we want to see this change. It is time for a change in this, and we're going to work hard to make sure we can get a positive change out of 1020. If that's all possible, we're going to work for it.
Are you optimistic that you can get that change?
I'm optimistic that we can get something that will benefit Jack. I am optimistic. But if we don't get 1020, we will have nothing. We'll be just as we are now. and what we have now is not working. The crime is out of control. Many people feel in Jackson. We've got to make a change. We've got to make a change to make our streets safer in Jackson for our businesses, for our elderly, for our citizens, for our students at Millsouth, Bellhaven, Jackson State, all our neighborhoods, Georgetown, Bellhaven, Shady Oak, Vernon, all these neighborhoods need to feel safe again.
Monitor 12 News this week for new developments from the state capitol during this final week of the 2023 regular session. We're back in a moment. If you have comments or questions about today's show or suggestion for an interview or segment, just drop us a line. Email our producers. The address is news@WJTV.com. Big thanks to Russ Latino and Representative Earle Banks for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.